So hello and welcome. Yes, it has been 5 minutes or so since I started the last Let's Play series, so of course it's time to start another. Seriously, if you watched my episode 0 of the Gryphonhorse series, you heard me talk about my epiphany regarding mod packs, and after creating the medieval fantasy mod pack for that series, my mind wandered to one of my favorite genres, post-apocalyptic. And at that point, I wondered whether it would be possible to make a decent mod pack on that theme. The answer is obviously yes. In fact, there are a number of great mods and existing mod packs that are specifically post-apocalyptic. And so I had a lot of amazing material to comb through in putting my own pack together. However, before I get to all of that, let me just talk a minute about the nature of the post-apocalyptic genre. Now, in the past, it was kind of a fringe genre, and the post-apocalyptic worlds depicted had gotten that way through all sorts of different reasons, and the resulting worlds were just as varied. However, post-apocalyptic-ism is not as fringe as it used to be, and the zombie apocalypse trope seems to have taken center stage. And while I will certainly embrace that to some degree, and do in fact include elements of that in my world, I'm hoping to achieve something a bit different. As I've mentioned before, I'm an old tabletop role player from way back. Of course, I played D&D and Advanced D&D and D&D 2nd and 3rd editions, 3.5 and so on. But I also enjoyed other settings and systems as well, and one of those was the original Gamma world and the reboot. Now in those worlds, humanity made it to the 24th century before almost wiping itself out and destroying the world in a nuclear holocaust. And the game begins a century later, where the war and the after effects left a scarred world of ruins and artifacts, recognizable in some ways and beyond recognition in others. But it's not a barren desert wasteland, or at least not entirely so. In many places, life thrives, and that's much closer to what I want here. So yeah, I will keep the zombies and even add some bits to make them more dangerous, or at least more obnoxious. However, the main idea is a landscape that's relatively intact, yet pretty broken as well. Familiar, yet alien and unfamiliar. A lot like Las Vegas. So that is kind of the starting point or where I want to take this. But how do I want to achieve this in Minecraft? Well, first I'm going to expand the premise a bit. Instead of a nuclear war, my spin on this is that there is some kind of disaster. Maybe an advanced science experiment gone wrong, such as trying to develop a breakfast cereal that actually does stay crispy in milk. Or maybe a natural disaster that combined with advanced technology to produce an unnatural disaster, like reality TV. But either way, the result's not just a breakdown of civilization, but a breakdown of the laws of physics and biology. And so as a result, the world's been reshaped, almost terraformed, even in the middle of cities, resulting in strange and jagged shapes. Possibly floating islands of rock and rubble even. Sound familiar? The boundary between universes has been shattered, and strange and alien creatures have crossed between worlds. Now, some have settled down and become part of the neighborhood, while others have eaten most of their neighborhood. It's a mixed bag, but the end result is that civilization was shattered even worse than the broken landscape. Now, humans are no longer the only sentient species. Well, some would argue that they never were, but I won't go there. However, in this case, the few pockets of civilization that still exist are just as likely to be alien and exotic as they are human, perhaps more so. So now there are kobold villagers, orc villagers, goblin villagers, gnu villagers, farlander villagers, burrower villagers, ribbit villagers, and even villager villagers. Most of those are friendly, or at least not openly hostile, and some could probably use a nap and a hug, or, in the worst case scenario, a blast from a shotgun. Now, you'll soon see which is which. And with all of that in place, this series will be somewhat story-driven. The protagonist, yours truly, will wake in a underground bunker a couple hundred years after the fall, and I'll need to make my way to the surface and just survive for starters. After I am somewhat assured of making it through each day, the next question is what to do with this new world. Now, will I continue to go it alone, or will I build a safe haven and community for myself and others? Will I tear down the ruins and clear away the rubble and restore the environment? Or will I restore the infrastructure and try to pick up the pieces where humanity left off? Or maybe I'll just try to accommodate both. At this point, I honestly don't know where I want to take this, and I suppose that will be at least partially based on whatever world I find myself in. So, how do I plan to make all that happen? Well, the first step is in creating the physical world itself. Now, I need a blasted and broken urban landscape, like the mess that remains after a children's birthday party, but slightly less chaotic. My traditional world building mods are just not going to get me there, but the obvious answer is Lost Cities mod. Now, I saw a lot of great stuff in videos about the mod, and when I was doing my research, I found that there's a companion mod by the same author called The Lost Worlds, and it's designed to work with the Lost Cities. So, I experimented with both, but I was having problems achieving what I wanted. The worlds were just too hostile and barren, even without spawns, and cities were often sunken 20 to 30 blocks below the surface in big pits. Now, I did enjoy the playtesting, but it was just not what I was looking for. So, I went back to the videos and I noticed that nobody was even mentioning the Lost Worlds, so I ditched that mod and tried generating worlds using just the Lost Cities mod, and I got much better results. With a bit more work, I found the settings I wanted and I made a custom profile, and so now I have a framework on which to build the rest of the world. Now, in this case, the surface of the world is covered with large patches of urban landscape and large patches of open land and water from various biomes. Now, this changes the mix of the materials that are readily available to me, and there are plenty of places where the bad guys live and spawn from, so I will be very much on the alert when running around in this environment, which is probably not as relaxing as my doctor would like, but it turns out that it is really fun and that has its own health benefit. Now, one of the curious things about the Lost Cities mod is that it generates entire cities, and to the veteran Minecraft player, that equates to lots and lots of structures. However, the cities are actually generated as terrain, not structures. Structures are generated later, and in a non-trivial number of cases, they kind of screw up the terrain from Lost Cities. But sometimes it still works, and sometimes it's just plain old weird. There's also the fact that too many structures kind of ruins the whole humanity on the edge of extinction effect. So I brought on a mod that lets me control the frequency of structures, and I set them to be 8 times less likely. And so far, that seems to be working pretty well. As somebody with compulsion issues, this less structured approach is a big challenge for me. And that was a joke. Now, obviously, I will not be alone out there, but who or what am I likely to encounter? Well, I already mentioned the civilized races, and all the usual vanilla mobs will still be around, except phantoms. I had to remove those for the reasons I outlined in episode 0 of the New Londinium series. But like I said, all the other vanilla mobs, both hostile and passive, will still be around. However, you will note some changes to all the bad guys in general, and zombies have had a complete makeover. And all of it comes from a resource pack in a mod. So the resource pack is Tissue's zombie pack. Now, it doesn't change the threat or behavior of zombies in any way, but oh man, it completely revamps their appearance and sounds. They now appear to be spookier, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of skins. Now, in vanilla Minecraft, if you've seen one zombie, you've pretty much seen them all. But that's no longer the case here. However, the real change is that there are now over 100 new zombie sounds. And instead of the same old boring groan that reminds me more of my hungover roommate back in the day, we now have a truly terrifying and blood-curdling collection of shrieks, groans, and growls. And of course, all sorts of unpleasant sounds that were probably recorded at one of the children's birthday parties I mentioned a moment ago. Or maybe a dentist's office. Now, all of that makes zombie encounters actually frightening. Or at the very least, incredibly uncomfortable. Which is what you should be feeling when dealing mano-a-mano with zombies. But wait, that's not all. I also added the zombie awareness mod, and this does change the apparent behavior and danger factor of zombies. By a lot. For one thing, when hostile mobs of any kind spawn, they have a tendency to group up and wander. So after a while, you have little herds of bad guys roaming the landscape, kind of like football hooligans after their teams lost the match. It's not pretty, and it's incredibly dangerous. Another change from this mod is that zombies are incredibly curious. They are attracted to lights from which they can spot from a very, very long ways off, and as long as they have direct line of sight and you are anywhere near that light, they will move in to investigate. So if your base is well lit at night and moths fluttering around the porch light bug you, you ain't seen nothing yet. Now, all hostile mobs have some additional triggers, and one is blood. Now, if you get hurt, even if it's the kind of damage that wouldn't normally produce blood, like drowning, eating raw pufferfish, or reading a harsh comment online, you will drop some blood on the pavement, and like sharks responding to blood in the water, the bad guys are going to come after you. And if you keep bleeding all over the place, they will have their own little trail of blood dots to follow right after you, like determined and evil little Pac-Man ghosts thirsting after your soul. And as if all that was not bad enough, the hostile mobs have apparently assumed the mentality of highly strung, evil librarians. They are hostile to any kind of noise you might make, and they will come to investigate and presumably shush you, or worse. Now, what can they hear? Well, they can hear you mining or harvesting blocks, as well as placing blocks. They can hear explosions, but big whoop, so can anybody else with ears, so that's not new. But they can also hear you fire bows and crossbows, eating food, and opening doors and gates. And like a cranky neighbor, they can hear and will investigate when you play discs. They're also attracted to the sound of buttons being pressed, tripwires being tripped, levers being levered, and pressure plates being pressured. They're also attracted to the sound of opening or closing a chest or barrel. So in the immortal words of Elmer Fudd, be very, very quiet. I have also added some various mods that bring a wider variety of mobs, including some exotic and mutant mobs that add that kind of alien feel I want. I tried to avoid mods that added bosses, or at the very least, I tried to avoid the ones that add lots of bosses. And based on my testing, I think I'm making things hard enough on myself as it is. I don't need to set the difficulty to 11. Of course, there are a number of mods that provide modern furniture and building materials, but the tentpole mods are the technology mods. Now, I've included Create, of course, and I have all the add-ons that I use in the New Londinium series, and a few extra besides. However, this is a world that was chewed up and spit back out a few centuries after the steampunk era. So I also needed something a little more high-tech than the Create mod family. And again, I did a bit of research and some play testing, and I eventually settled on the Thermal series. And I've included almost all of the modules. The only one I didn't add was the Thermal Locomotion mod, as I will get all my train-based goodness from the Create mod and its offspring, because for me, they are the only rail option I care to use. The Thermal series brings RF energy to the game, and this is basically the equivalent of electricity as opposed to Create's kinetic energy. Now, I expect that I will start out relying mostly on Create, and over time I will shift to the Thermal series, or some kind of blend of the two. Now, technologically for me, it will be a brave new world, but we'll figure it out together, or die trying. I suppose I will be the one to do all the dying, but you know what I'm trying to say here. So, I guess it's time to climb into my bunker and wait for my cue to enter the stage and start the first chapter of my epic story of survival in a world gone mad. Or matter. In the meanwhile, I hope this finds you and yours in good health, good spirits, and perhaps a touch of good fortune. Cheers.